Education in Uruguay is compulsory for a total of 9 years, beginning at the primary level, and is free from the pre-primary through the university level. In 1996, the gross primary enrollment rate was 111.7%, and the net primary enrollment rate was 92.9%. Primary school attendance rates were unavailable for Uruguay as of 2001. Characteristics: Uruguay had the highest literacy rate in Latin America, at 96% in 1985. There was no appreciable difference in literacy rates between males and females, but there were discrepancies between urban and rural rates. Uruguay's system of universal, free, and secular education required a total of 9 years of compulsory school attendance, from ages 6 to 15. The proportion of children of primary school age enrolled in school had long been virtually 100%. Furthermore, from 1965 to 1985, the proportion of children of secondary school age enrolled in some form of secondary school grew from 44 to 70%. Also the highest rate in Latin America. The post-secondary education enrollment rate was about 20%. Co-education was the norm, and females and males attended school in near equal numbers at all levels, as is typical of any country. However, rates of schooling were higher in urban areas than in rural areas. The quality of education in Uruguay was rated as high. Teaching was a socially respected profession and one that paid relatively well. Most teachers, trained in teachers' training colleges, were deemed well qualified. The main problem confronting the education system was the inadequacy of facilities, instructional materials, and teachers' aides. Rural areas often suffered from woefully insufficient facilities and supplies. Urban schools often were seriously overcrowded and were forced to resort to holding classes in multiple shifts. In addition, dropout and repetition rates, although moderate by Latin American standards, were still considered high. Primary education. Primary education in Uruguay was free and compulsory. It encompassed 6 years of instruction. The number of primary schools in 1987 was 2,382, including 240 private schools. There were 16,568 primary school teachers and 354,177 primary school students. This resulted in a pupil-teacher ratio of approximately 21:1 in 1987, compared with about 30:1 in 1970. Boys and girls were enrolled in almost equal numbers. Secondary education. General education in secondary schools encompass 6 years of instruction divided into 2 3-year cycles. The first, or basic, cycle was compulsory. The second cycle was geared to university preparation. In addition to the academic track, public technical education schools provided secondary school education that was technical and vocational in nature. The two systems were parallel in structure, and there was little provision for transfer between the two. All sectors of society traditionally tended to prefer the academic course of study, which was regarded as more prestigious. As a result, academic secondary education had expanded more rapidly than technical education in the second half of the 20th century. In 1987 there were 276 general secondary schools in Uruguay, including 118 private schools. However, the public high schools were much larger, so that in 1987 they actually contained 145,083 of the country's 175,710 secondary school students enrolled in both day classes and night classes. In addition, 94 technical education schools had a total enrollment of 52,766 students in 1987. Male and female enrollment at the secondary level was roughly equal, but females slightly outnumbered males overall. It appeared that females were in the majority in the basic cycle but were very slightly outnumbered by males in the university preparatory cycle. Higher education. Uruguay has only one public university, the University of the Republic, founded in 1849. The Catholic University of Uruguay, established in 1984 and also in Montevideo. Education at the University of the Republic was free and, in general, open to all those possessing a baccalaureate, or certificate awarded for completion of both cycles of general secondary education. Despite the free tuition, however, access to a university education tended to be limited to children of middle and upper-income families because the need to supplement the family income by working, coupled with the expensive books and other fees, placed a university education out of the reach of many. Moreover, the fact that the only public university was in Montevideo severely limited the ability of those in the interior to attend university unless their families were relatively well off financially. In 1988, about 69% of university students were from Montevideo. The number of university students continued to grow rapidly, from nearly 22,000 in 1970 to over 61,000 in 1988. Of that total, women accounted for about 58%. Most courses of study were intended to last from 4 to 6 years. But the average time spent at university by a successful student was usually considerably longer. As in the rest of Latin America, maintaining the status of student had various advantages, such as reduced fares on buses and subsidized canteens. This was one reason that the student population was so large yet the number of graduates relatively low. In 1986, only 3,654 students graduated from university, whereas 16,878 entered that year. Uruguayans exhibited a strong preference for the disciplines and professions they deemed prestigious, such as law, social science, engineering, medicine, economics, and administration. Observers continued to note the discrepancy between university training and job opportunities, particularly in the prestigious fields. This gap contributed to the substantial level of emigration of the best educated young Uruguayan professionals. History. Origins and evolution. Uruguay pioneered universal, free, and compulsory primary education in the Americas under the influence of José Pedro Varela, whose writings convinced the government to pass the 1877 Law of Common Education. The model adopted for public schools was taken from the French system, and a centralized, nationwide system was established. A rigid separation into three branches of education grew up: primary, secondary, and university. Teacher training for grade school teachers was connected to the primary school system. The National Institute of Technical Education grew up as an extension of the secondary school system. The Organic University Law of 1958 provided that the governing bodies of the University of the Republic would be elected by the members of the faculty, alumni, and students. By the late 1960s, Uruguayan secondary schools and the various faculties of the University of the Republic had become extremely politicized. Student sit-ins, demonstrations, and even riots were commonplace. Classes and examinations were frequently disrupted. After 1973, the authorities vowed to put an end to this situation, and political purges in the education system became widespread. Some teachers were able to find work in private schools, but others either left the profession or emigrated. Entire branches of the university, such as the Institute of Social Sciences, were closed for a time. Academic standards suffered across the board as some of the best teachers and professors were fired and replaced by people with only mediocre qualifications. Reforms under military rule, 1973–85. In 1973, the year in which Uruguay descended into authoritarian rule, major changes were decreed in the education system. The National Council for Education was set up to oversee all three branches of education under the supervision of the executive branch of government. At the same time, the compulsory length of schooling was raised from 6 to 9 years. The secondary curriculum was completely reorganized, as was the pattern of teacher training. Finally, the INET saw its status and budget upgraded. However, overall spending on education fell from 12.2% of the central government budget in 1974 to 7.3% in 1982. Enrollments in primary education fell 6% from 1968 to 1981. From 1968 to 1982, secondary school enrollments grew 6%. However, about half the secondary school students in Montevideo dropped out before receiving any certification. Over the same period, there was a boom in technical schools. Enrollments increased 66% in the interior and 27% in Montevideo. The major cause of this increase was the new Ciclo Básico, which added 3 years of compulsory secondary education to the 6 years of compulsory primary schooling. However, the dropout rate remained about 50%. Enrollments in the University of the Republic doubled from 1968 to 1982, but the proportion of students graduating fell to just 8%. In 1984, as something of a parting shot, Uruguay's military government formally granted university status to a Catholic college that had been expanding over the previous decade. This ended the University of the Republic's monopoly, which had lasted since its foundation in 1849. The new Catholic University of Uruguay remained extremely small, however, compared with its rival recent years. Uruguay, under the initiative of President Tabaré Vázquez, approved and implemented the program called Cabal Project, which is currently running successfully, providing all primary school children with their own cabalita, as the laptops are affectionately called. In 2010, with the new government of José Mujica Cordano, the program will continue, and is planned to be extended to cover all secondary children as well. The laptops were developed by a non-governmental organization, one laptop per child.